Thank you so much to everybody who took some time out of their day to be with us for this hour as we talk about mastering GCC High, when, why, and how to best utilize it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. This is very own. We have Pat Shaw, who is our Senior Assessment Manager. He focuses on, of course, overseeing and working with our assessments team. He holds several certifications from the Cyber AB, centered around CMMC, Information Systems Auditor, a whole host of other things. So Pat, thank you for being with us this morning.
Absolutely.
We also on the call have Seth Earl, who is our Senior System Administrator. He focuses mostly here on working with Azure native tools. So it's a whole host of different Microsoft products, as well as holds several certifications from Microsoft, various admin capacities. So Seth, thank you for joining us.
Yep, good to be here.
Wonderful. And we also, last but not least, have Jay Molis, who is our Senior Network Engineer. And again, very well versed on our Office 365 products, holds more certifications than this, but focuses a lot of his work on virtualization services and is certified through Microsoft in that regard. So thank you very much, Jay, for being here as well.
Hello, everyone.
Wonderful. So those are the speakers that we have with us today, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Pat Shaw to get us started talking about some of the when of using GCC High.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So let's start, setting the scene and talking about Microsoft's 4 main cloud licensing options. You can see them here right on the screen. Obviously, there is the Microsoft 365 cloud commercial solution right at the very top, which is a great solution for customers who don't work with sensitive data types like, we'll say CUI or ITAR, or have a strict need for a solution to adhere to regulatory compliance frameworks. So it's a very good place to start, if you're trying to get a cloud environment, but again, would want to make sure that, if you are needing a higher regulation, that's probably not the good fit. But, this solution does meet compliance for FedRAMP requirements for the commercial. It's really not recommended, like we were talking about, being in any type of government contracts, right? So the two in the middle, we'll be really focusing more so on is the GCC and the GCC High. And you'll notice that included in these product offerings are very similar, with really the Azure directory feature being the main difference between them, as you can see right there between the Azure commercial versus the Azure government feature. And then lastly, the one at the very bottom is the DoD licensing option. Again, it's pretty much the exact same as the GCC High, except it's really only reserved for anyone working for the Department of Defense or other government top level regencies, if you will. So really no other contractors or outside personnel have the ability to get access to that product SKU. You basically need to be invited there or already be a part of that organization to get that particular product SKU. All right. So as we mentioned before, we're going to be diving deeper, right, more so into the GCC and GCC High options, given that these two offerings are most commonly, utilized by agencies and contractors today, more in the government realm. But we're going to focus on the difference between them and why you choose one over the other. So first off, on the left-hand side, obviously, is the GCC High, or excuse me, regular GCC information, and obviously on the right is the GCC High breakdown. And we'll go over 4 key areas just to solidify, the environment that they're both using. So obviously, security and compliance is 1, data residency is 2, access control is 3, and service availability is 4. So when it comes to security and compliance, GCC is very moderate, but kind of more the middle of the road type of option. It's clearly much more secure, say, than like we were talking about the commercial option for Office 365 or other maybe cloud, commercial vendors. But it doesn't, meet the high levels of regulatory compliance for that. So while GCC does meet the requirements for most U.S. government agencies through FedRAMP requirements, which is Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, it's trying to provide basically some very moderate level of security controls to protect sensitive data. And in fact, the GCC is really usually called GCC Moderate by Microsoft when it was first released. But on the other hand, really GCC High is designed for organizations that want the stringent security and compliance requirements, including those really that deal with controlled unclassified information or other sensitive data like export controlled ITAR, et cetera. This really adheres more so around the regulation of the FedRAMP High, the Department of Defense Level 4 impact level, as well as ITAR compliance. So it really checks a lot of those boxes, being in GCC High. Data residency is quite similar as well between the two, as everything stays in the continental US. The only real difference is that GCC High has a smaller number of designated data centers for government customers, therefore making it more exclusive and more secure, kind of in its own little enclave. Pivoting to access control, this is also quite similar between both offerings, with access limited to U.S. federal, state, local, and tribal government entities, as well as partners or contractors that work with them. The difference is that GC High is more tailored for organizations with more stringent access control requirements because, as mentioned, it's typically used by organizations that need or handle CUI. And while we didn't really talk about price yet, it's obviously doesn't come to a shock that GCC High is going to be probably a little more expensive due to its enhanced security, it's more sensitive information that it's storing, and all the needed extra checks and balances that Microsoft is putting against that deliverable. But overall, GCC High does prove and gives a higher level of security, compliance, data residency, and assurances compared to the regular GCC. At a higher cost, unfortunately. But the choice really depends on the specific requirements and sensitivity of the data being handled by the organization. So, really look at your contracts. See if you are going to be, obtaining or using or having transmitting CUI, because really at that point it's really going to solidify, what bucket you want to be in, whether that's GCC or GCC High. And now, Jay, if you want to kick it off from here, that'd be terrific.
Thank you, Pat.
No problem.
Yeah, basically, after giving the open-ended, it depends with everything, whether you go with GCC or GCC High, to find out what's pretty much right for you. There's basically 5 major areas that'll help you to make that decision on which version your organization needs. If you're needing to be CMMC compliant at levels 2 or 3, that automatically silos you to the GCC High environment. If you are level 1, you can stay in the GCC. Same can be said of the CUI categories that your organization works with. If you're doing anything with defense or nuclear, you're also, again, relegated to having to use GCC High. ITAR is slightly more widely supported in both GCC and GCC High, but the decision will come into play when you consider export controlled data. If you have to have it, you have to have GCC High. Criminal Justice Information Services security policies should also be considered. If you're a part of the defense industry base or working with federal entities, we're talking folks beyond local government and law enforcement, then you're also required to use GCC High over just GCC. And if you deal with North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC for short, and or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC for short, then GCC High is your only option, as GCC doesn't have the needed offerings to fulfill their requirements. So we're just going to leave this up on the screen for a moment so you can all see at a glance what those differences are that I just sort of explained. As you can see, there are more yeses down the GCC High column, so often it becomes apparent that it's the needed solution purely based on compliance. Okay. Assuming everyone can now see whether or not they'll need GCC or GCC High, we'd like to quickly mention some of the alternative options that are out there. After all, defense industry base is vast, and many contractors who begin the first engagements using an ITAR compliant data enclave, which typically mirrors what many had and have been doing on premise. While many have already shifted their users and workloads into GCC High, some are still debating making that switch. As such, we wanted to touch briefly on the alternatives and talk through why they would or would not be recommended. The first of these is not a cloud alternative solution at all. It's just keeping your data in an on-premise server. This is a good option because it keeps everything internally under one roof, but can be added risk because there is often less stringent adherences to best practice guidelines because there's less oversight than using a managed solution. This puts a lot of responsibility back on you as the company to ensure compliance and proper procedures and functions. For example, cloud solutions are patched automatically whenever it's necessary. On-prem servers do not, and therefore need to be monitored by someone that understands when it's time to patch. It's important you have the knowledge to accomplish this so your environment doesn't fall behind on security best practice and create exploitable vulnerabilities. You need to always look for vulnerability announcements, what patches may apply, and any settings that may be needed to be configured to keep you compliant and safe. Another common option is to stick with the ITAR compliant data enclave option. The data enclave is essentially just shared storage for legal or technical documentation, which may or may not include COI or CDI, covered defense information. It's relatively quick and easy to deploy and often maps one-to-one with a data enclave that is already on premise. This is often seen as less burdensome, cheaper option than GCC High migration, as you could simply move your on-premise docs to the cloud using basic migration tools. You could even purchase just the bare minimum licenses for the job. While this sounds like a great deal and saves significant upfront cost, it may end up costing you more in the long run if you aren't able to prove proper compliance in your enclave configuration. The last alternative is to create your own piecemeal solution through a series of separate services. While this may be possible, it will require expert configuration from your team, deep knowledge of the regulatory frameworks and their standards, and complicated development to ensure proof integration between disparate systems. There are also just a lot of different moving pieces to consider, and it's easy for needed functionality to get overlooked.
So as you can tell, there are alternatives out there. However, in our expert opinion, after being helped over 200 clients achieve the regulatory compliance they need, we do tend to recommend just biting the bullet and making the move to GCC High. We're not saying that just because we are resellers. There are just real benefits from being in one well-connected, well-established environment. The first major benefit is GCC High is a comprehensive solution. You don't have to worry about compatibility of the different components, and you can rest knowing that the regulatory compliance is already taken care of. Microsoft provides everything you need: your email, your identity, your storage, even the different collaboration tools, and they ensure that they're compliant with NIST, ITAR, CMMC, and other frameworks by ensuring that FCI, CUI, and CDI is all handled, stored, and shared appropriately without you really having to worry about that back-end storage. Another major benefit is knowing that non-secure applications aren't inadvertently showing up in what's supposed to be your secure environment. Microsoft knows that, if Microsoft knows that a product processes data outside of America, that product won't be included in GCC High. If they know that a new product they released hasn't been tested for security, or it has some kind of flaw that can't be patched, they won't include it in GCC High. You don't have to worry about being in the commercial environment and a user stumbling upon a feature that isn't compliant. Now you as an administrator don't have to worry about checking the details of each and every program of the application to validate their compliance yourself. Lastly, GCC High natively integrates with a lot of the other government-specific applications and services your clients, customers, or contractors may be using themselves. So DoD, they are in Microsoft 365 DoD. Their teams will integrate with your GCC High environment easier than your commercial environment. This helps streamline your workflows and creates a smoother process for the day-to-day operations overall. So now that we've kind of honed in on all the reasons GCCI is our recommendation, we're going to take a moment just to kind of share a couple of the considerations to take when using GCC High. Some of these we take care of on your behalf when we license them. Others are purely optional offerings for you to, be aware of. The first one is conditional access. CMMC requires you to have control over your CUI. You have to have control over the workstations that people are signing into so that they're your managed workstations. Conditional access is something you have to enable. You have to have the licensing for it to be able to set that up. In that same vein, Intune. If you're going to allow users to use their phones to access their email that may or may not contain CUI, you have to utilize the Intune to control those phones, to bring them into your CMMC framework so that you control the data there. And then when using GCI, there's the issue where application integration, older applications or applications where somebody threw 365 support into it may not support GCC High. A lot of older ones, a lot of niche products, people program the commercial Office 365 integration in them hard-coded. And so when you try to connect them to a GCC High environment, they fail because it doesn't know how to talk to the Microsoft environment. You need to be aware that is something that may come up when you utilize GCC High, and you may have to reach out to the developers to fix that if possible. And it's not just the third-party applications that don't always work in GCC High. Previously, I mentioned that if Microsoft decides that a program is not secure enough or can't meet their FedRAMP requirements, they don't include this. That's something that they've been trying to fix, but it is something you need to be aware of. One big one was always Microsoft To Do. We've had multiple people ask about that, and it wasn't available for the longest time until more recently it started becoming available. Because of that, you kind of have to keep an eye on the Microsoft roadmap to see when stuff becomes released for the GCC High and the government clouds for your use. The last thing to be aware about is your cross-cloud collaboration. A couple years back, Microsoft severed the tie between the commercial and the government data centers. Since then, they've slowly cobbled them together, but there's still some headaches that arise where to be able to have guest users or B2B users, you and the admin on the commercial side have to work closely together. Sometimes users can't join a Teams meeting in the other environment unless they open it and sign as a guest, which adds headaches to the users and kind of interferes with collaboration. But on the opposite side, you do get the better collaboration with the DoD side because now you're not having to do that to join their environments. And those are kind of the biggest headaches we've seen with this. It's something I want you to just be aware of for the product in general. So this right here is just the roadmap. As you can see, it's got all the list of the different applications. It's got their statuses, the development, the rolling out. When you go to look for anything inside of the filter the items below section, there's a cloud instance menu to the right over, Katie. Yep. You want to make sure to have GCC High so you can see when stuff is being released, and they always keep the logs. It's a full list of what has and hasn't been released or what's in development. As you can see, it's about half of it's been launched, half of it's still in development. Whereas compared to commercial, they have a whole lot more launches than GCC High. So this is something that I regularly check in on just to see what's being released for GCC High, to see where Microsoft's patching their gaps between the environments. And that is a link in this that you'll get when the slideshow is sent out later.
All right, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pat, Jay, and Seth for all of the insight. We greatly appreciate it. We are going to turn it over to some of the Q&A. I know when a lot of folks were able to register to attend today, they put in some really great questions that we wanted to be sure we took the time to address while we were all here together. So I'm just going to start going through that list, reading off a few, and if there is any other questions that folks have that come up, feel free to put them into the Q&A chat, and we will do our best to get them answered. So this first question here, I think is probably going to be really well suited, Pat, for you to go ahead and answer. The question was, when using GCC High or any cloud-hosted enclave, what will CMMC auditors be looking for to ensure that the data is being handled securely?
So yeah, great question here. So ultimately, any type of cloud solution, an auditor will make sure that it's meeting FedRAMP or better requirements to making sure that it's able to meet, CMMC requirements. Say if we're going at that mark, and then at that point, with a Microsoft product, it is, configurable, right? So again, just having GCC High isn't basically as long as we have that, we're protected and safe. It then is another step of making sure that once you do have that tenant or that service, that you're configuring it around, any of the 110 controls that CMC is, requesting, whether that's login retention, access control, any of the major domains, right? Because it really at that point is an extension of say your traditional environment and into a hybrid environment. So what are you doing, for your traditional environment or maybe physical environment that you have internally at your, business? You'd also would want to make sure that any of those controls are also mimicked or controlled the same way up in the cloud, in those different buckets of control sets. So it is, definitely good to make sure that you're in the right product or solution. It's then another to making sure that you're locking it down and you're aligned with the flow, right, of say CUI. If your cloud system is also hosting, transmitting, or storing CUI, that is also following like requirements and controls that you would do, internally or on premise.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat, for that explanation. And
Absolutely.
we've got another question here that I actually see a very similar question that somebody just put into the Q&A not too long ago. Somebody else had asked this when they registered. So I will raise this probably to Jay, maybe Seth can chime in as well. But the question is, can you communicate outside of the GCC cloud environment? Does it talk to other systems and kind of how does that all work?
I'm going to give the yes, but kind of an answer. Yes, of course, you can communicate outside of the environment. You can send emails, you can share files, you can do different things. The biggest thing is you have to maintain your compliancy. So, for instance, if you're sending an email, you need to make sure that's got CY or anything that's confidential. You want to make sure that things are encrypted and that everything is set up properly. The one thing you can't do is you can't manage the other side, but you should, or you really need to make sure that your side, you need to make sure your side is compliant and that the other side is supposed to be compliant and that they, and that they attest to being compliant for the information that you are sending, especially if it's information that's not supposed to be sent to anyone that's not compliant.
Great, thank you, Jay. And another question that we had early on, it gets a little specific, but hopefully we can share some resources. We are looking to discuss the connection to commercial products that are either prohibited or allowed when transacting with ITAR, CUI, FCI, and kind of specifically the impact level 2, 4, 5, as well as other restricted data types. I will kind of open that up to Seth, Pat, whoever wants to jump in on that one.
Yeah, so Office 365 has no real inherent controls over that. It will let you put whatever you want in the cloud. It'll let you connect to whatever applications have been programmed to allow the connection to GCC High or the .us environment. From there, it comes down to the policies and procedures of your company and your CMMC framework to decide how you want to proceed with that. Pat, if you want to go over how that works on their end.
Yeah, and I guess just kind of to talk about a little bit about like the IL2 versus IL4. Those are kind of buckets of impact levels, right? That a company organization might need to abide by or might need to be aware of. So again, for like impact level 2, IL2, it's great for GCC. So that would be, not, public or non-critical mission information. So with that, it's going to be your, maybe federal contact information, very low level, specificity or sensitivity, to work in that bucket, right? That's kind of what Microsoft is doing for GCC. But GCC High, as you can see here for the DoD CC SRG level, goes all the way up to IL4. So IL4 really is for CUI, non-critical mission information, and non-national security systems. So this is really, kind of showing you that, CUI would fit in that bucket, and this bucket of, of the application or the service that they're providing would support up to IL4, for that specificity. So again, as we're looking at this, there is some overlap, FedRAMP and DFARS 80171 or 7012, excuse me. But really, I think what it boils down to is that if you're really only at level 1 of CMC compliance, GCC probably is going to fit the mold, right? You're only getting federal contact information. It is some of it non-public, but again, that bucket would facilitate and be okay for that data to be on the particular service or provided framework of GCC. Or again, for CUI, that's when you really want to go to the high because it's a higher level, and it's really going to give you that much more of the specificity that CMMC level 2 is looking for the 110 controls. So, again, as you're looking through, definitely look at your contracts, look at what data types that you're receiving, and, definitely make an educated guess. But if you really have export control or CUI information that is specified, the best bet is to definitely do GCC High. That way, you're in a bucket that's going to provide the right security and framework to make sure that, yourself and an auditor coming through, that you'll be in the right bucket to have it configured and secured.
And then the last thing that we're going to flash up here on the screen for you guys, I'll make it a little bit bigger. So specifically when it comes to that impact level 5, Microsoft themselves, on their documentation website does have their guidelines for configuring that environment, what needs to be done when you're setting that up. So never be afraid to lean on your resources. Of course, there's lots of great information out there, and we are always happy to help. The experts at Docs are always happy to help answer any specific questions that you guys may have. But definitely, go to the source themselves, see what Microsoft has to say about it, and utilize those resources. So we can definitely send this around as well for you guys. All right, so going back to a few more questions that we've been getting in through the QA chat. Again, some of them do get really specific, so some of them we might just be better served to follow up one-on-one later on. But one of the questions that we got here, is there any advice that you guys can offer on onboarding devices on Microsoft 365 Defender on GCC High?
Yeah, so the best way to onboard those devices is generally just through Microsoft Intune. You can push that out through a policy through endpoint security, and then so long as your devices are joined to Intune, which can be Azure AD joined only devices or hybrid Azure AD joined or hybrid Entra ID joined devices, the policy will push down to them and they will enroll themselves in Microsoft Defender for you. There's just a couple pieces of information you have to put in, and the Intune will handle the rest from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth. And one of, again, a couple other configuration questions that get rather specific, but I'm not going to go into those. One of the more general, OneDrive on GCC High, does that store your data in a secure environment?
Yes, OneDrive is back-ended by SharePoint in the environment. And in the GCC High, everything is encrypted. The whole back-end is encrypted. Microsoft employees themselves cannot access the data. It is actually completely separated from them. They can't actually get anything in your environment. So you need to make sure that, but everything in there is completely secure, encrypted.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. And again, this one, floor is open to anybody. A question here. Does Docs offer a service to audit existing GCC High tenants for NIST and CMMC compliance? Disclaimer, that doesn't require a full-blown gap analysis.
So yeah, I mean, docs can do analysis, specifically around that. So again, we are, do full-fledged audits, but if there is, the chance of, hey, we just need you guys to audit, around the, that environment, we could definitely work with you and figure out, statement of work that could, we could then do an audit and give you a good output around, the regulation, how you're maintaining that environment.
Awesome. And yes, that Pat Shaw himself is usually the man for those types of undertakings. So source of truth, hearing it directly from him. Another great question that we got, does all of our existing commercial Office 365 environment transfer to GCC High automatically once you are signed up?
No, unfortunately, GCC High and commercial, because they are the two separate clouds entirely, they do require a full migration over to the GCC High. So that means standing up a new tenant, technically new user accounts. Everything has to be recreated from scratch in the GCC High environment. You can sometimes bring over Azure subscriptions, like Azure Compute subscriptions, but even then, I don't guarantee the reliability on that. I have had issues with that in the past, but all of the Office side of things have to be built from scratch.
I just want to add one extra item to that is because are some features in the two environments that may not, that there are things in GCC High that may not be implemented yet. So there are sometimes some features and things like there was some extra tasks and a separate application called tasks that doesn't move over, and there are other things that may and features that may not completely map over.
Great, thank you guys. Another compliance-based question that we have here, as calling plans are non-compliant, what is the option for Teams, either that voice or the phones, the video in GCC High? So what is compliant that it lives inside that environment?
You can, there are calling plans that you can get from third-party companies that will integrate with Office 365. Microsoft doesn't want to be responsible for the communications that may happen over the phone, which is why they're not offering calling plans in the GCC High. But there are other outside third-party companies that can handle the phone service, and that does directly integrate with Office 365 so that you can manage all of that. And there are, depending on what type of phone system you have, some company phone systems can also be integrated directly.
Great. We have a question here as well from a guest who already has GCC High. They're already utilizing that environment. The question is, do you recommend additional backups for the environment? I get lots of emails from vendors saying I need to back up my Office 365 environment. Need to do it? If yes, who do we recommend? What's the deal?
Yes, you do have to have separate backups for your environment. Microsoft promises to do their best for continuity of data. So they only guarantee that they do their best to guarantee that they won't lose all of your data immediately, but they have nothing for backups. If a user goes through and deletes everything, they have no guarantee that that data will still be there, which may violate your CMMC framework. Because of that, we do recommend a third-party cloud backup solution. They do have to be FedRAMP compliant for the solution. We currently recommend Druva as our backup solution. That's who we've been using for all of our GCC High deployments, and they've been working quite well with it. You just have to get the FedRAMP version of the product. And we can always assist with getting that set up for you and getting it quoted out if you require assistance.
Awesome. And you probably would be chatting with Seth for that very work. So yes, absolutely. We've got the people here to make it happen. And another great question that we got: for a company with only 4 employees that need to work with CUI, meaning just a small number are handling that type of information, and the rest don't need it, do you suggest using a combination of GCC High and normal commercial licenses, or would you suggest something more like an enclave solution?
So a lot depends on how your company operates. There are companies that have, they may only have 4 employees that need to work with the CUI, and they may, but they may only be a few more employees. It makes it easier for it to be, everybody included and everybody set up. But, if you're 100-person company and you only have 4 employees that need to work with CUI, then yes, you can, work separately that way and have an enclave type environment. And we do have customers that, different customers do it each of the 2 different ways. In addition to that, you just want to make sure you can't have the same domain. So if it's, xyzcompany.com is the email that they're receiving, if you do split that, then then in the enclave, you might be, XYZ company GCC High.com or however you want to separate it, but they won't be the same email addresses, the same domains in both environments. So you have to take that into account when you're making that decision.
Great. And again, the questions just keep coming in. So thank you guys so much for sharing. I hope we're getting through most of the big ones here. Another question. So years ago, there was a discussion that government officials, that there might be some incentives or help to address the cost of companies moving to GCC High. Is that still something that's on the table? As in, is helping a CUI heavy contractor get into GCC High? Is there any kickback, or is it really just the cost of doing business?
So currently, yeah, we haven't seen anything as of in fruition to say that kickbacks are going to occur. So our the way that we've been for the many years in DPARS and 171 and now CMMC is really just to add on to the cost of your product or solution. I know that obviously causes some issues with being maybe more competitive, but that's what again the CMC AB and again a lot of other entities have been saying of if you need to provide more time and tooling and R&D work to get up to the 110 controls, then yeah, then again the cost of how you're doing a thing should rise with that, so that way you're not just eating that cost. So I mean, another thing you can look into is grants for different types of auditing or capabilities in your state. To see if there is maybe some breaks to help in that accord of maybe auditing or implementing. But objectively, it would just be to try to understand what is necessarily needed, and then curve that cost into your products or solutions.
And I will chime in to say that if you have any interest in talking through sort of your specific situation, giving us a little more detail about your company size, breakdown location, things like that, at the start of the QA, I did put in an email. It is _events@docsnet.com. Feel free to shoot an email over to that email address, and we will go ahead and coordinate, put you in contact with some of our sales resources who would be, better able to talk through your specific situation, and get you the support that you need. So again, you are always welcome to go ahead and shoot any other questions or emails off there. We will disseminate internally to get you the answers. So another great question that we had was, does Docs, specifically help develop SharePoint sites for GCC High?
We don't do SharePoint development. We can do, we will, migrate data if you, let's say, for instance, are migrating from, commercial to GCC High. We can migrate the data, from there, and your sites, are intact. But we don't actually do the SharePoint development. We can refer you over to other companies that do SharePoint development, and to manage that piece of it if you need new stuff set up.
Great. I will take sort of one last scroll through some of our QA here, see if there was anything we missed. I see maybe a few folks had thrown some stuff into the chat. Oh, great. So are CMMC audits currently being required before government contracts, or is this still in the future? Also, who does the audits? I think, Pat, you can speak to this one as well.
Sorry, I cut out there. Say that again, Katie.
Yeah, no problem. So the question was, are CMMC audits currently being performed / required before government contracts, or is this still in the future? Also, who does the audits?
So, so yeah, it's as of right now, it is in the futures, right? So, the regulation for CMMC is still being inked and reviewed, which again, we've seen some pretty good progress over the summer into now the fall. So again, we're looking into seeing the regulation maybe as early as maybe Q1 of next year, start rolling out to different types of contracts, all depending on how fast and nimble, basically the regulation goes into effect. And again, once that goes into play, it will then be in contracts, and at that point, again, entities and clients will have to make sure that they're tracking that as new contracts come in. To understanding, nothing should be retroactive. So again, if you're getting CUI and you're doing the DFARS 800-171 cybersecurity requirements, that's great. But none of that should be retrofitted from previous contracts. But what I will say is that CMMC and DFARS 800-171 are using the same 110 control sets. Just CMMC is a little bit more of a maturity model, which really looks into how you're doing it, procedures, policies. So having kind of the administrative, physical, and technical things really dotted and T's crossed would really be what you want to do as soon as you can, so that way when an auditor, right, which would be done by a C3 PAO, they are going to come out, work with you, set up a time, place, and pricing to then come out and actually do an audit. And that's usually a pass or fail type of situation. So that would definitely be in the futures. I think the time now is to, get acclimated and understand what's at stake. So that way, when those new contracts come down, you're either pretty close or you're getting yourselves close to getting into, certification at that point. So that way you can then enact those new contracts with that new requirements.
Awesome. Thank you, Pat. And this question will probably turn over to Seth, just because I know that you had spoken quite a bit about using Intune. The question was, do you have to use Intune, or are there any other mobile MDMs available?
There are a lot of MDMs out there. Intune isn't the requirement. We always recommend Intune because obviously the whole comprehensiveness of Intune with the Office 365 environment. Microsoft has their monopoly over the fact that you're using the Outlook app, the Teams app, and it integrates nicely with conditional access. Microsoft has teamed up with Jamf, the Apple MDM solution, and so they do allow cross compliance to show. They allow Jamf compliance to show up in GCC High Office 365 to be used with conditional access policies. But in terms of BYOD, we heavily recommend Intune for corporate-owned phones. We say really any MDM, you just have to have control over the devices.
Great. And I think there was one more sort of Intune mobile phone related question, but quite frankly, it has been buried in the QA and I cannot get back to it. If you had more questions about this, again, feel free to shoot that email off to _events and we will make sure that we get you pointed to the right person internally within Docs. So we are getting close to the top of the hour. We'll try to answer a few more questions. One that we had here. So what is the status of B2B collaboration specifically between GCC High and other tenants? For example, GCC High to commercial, commercial to GCC. How does that all work together?
So earlier this year, Microsoft started lifting the veil between the two environments. There is B2B support between clouds. The only issue is it is tedious to put together. You and the opposite tenant have to work together to allow list your tenants in each other's environments. And basically, it's not so much user driven as it's admin driven. You have to actually cooperate with them. You have to enable the cross cloud collaboration. And then for every commercial environment, or if you're in GCC High, or every GCC High, if you're in commercial, you have to get their tenant ID, they have to get yours, and you have to explicitly allow the communication.
Wonderful. Thank you, Seth, for that explanation. I was going to say, so I think really that is most of the questions that we had here coming through our chat. I don't see anything new rolling in. So I believe with that, I'm just going to give a really big heartfelt thank you to Pat, Jay, and Seth for sharing their time with us today, being here to kind of talk through GCC High, when, why, and how to best utilize it, as well as taking the time to answer all of the great questions that we got from those who were able to be with us this morning. So, once again, thank you so much for hanging out with us for this just under an hour. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Steve. We appreciate you too. So again, _events@docsnet.com. If you have any outstanding questions that didn't get answered, we will go ahead and make sure that you get a hold of the right person. Other than that, we will be sending around a copy of this recording. We will send around a copy of the slide deck to all of you lovely folks who are able to join us today. So thank you so very much for hanging out with us. And if you are interested in spending even more time with Docs, October 25th, at the end of the month, we are going to be putting on a Lunch and Learn event at the historic George Eastman House in Rochester. If you are at all interested in that, again, you can reach out. We'd love to shoot you an invitation so you can join us. Otherwise, again, thank you for being here. Have a great rest of your day.